So let's first talk about your school days. You've been quoted as saying, the only things that I liked at school were the games. Why the lack of interest in the academic side of things?
Ah! You attacked me with a microphone. God. And art and English literature. But yeah, they dressed up all the, quote, academic subjects in boring paper, brown paper, that said it was just totally unattractive. That's how they dressed it up.
Did you excel at games?
Yep.
Which games in particular?
Netball and trampolining and athletics.
Any particular sport in athletics, running or what?
The javelin, actually, which has come in handy in some gigs because I use the mic stand. If there's some real pinheads in the audience, I can pin them down with my mic stand.
After school, at 17, you left home to live in London, something which you called an adventure, was it?
Yeah. I ended up sharing a flat with a puff in one room. It was a one-room flat, and it was a communal kitchen and all that. And where else did I live? I lived with someone else. And then I went back home because I didn't find anywhere else to live, just for a short spell. Then I left home for good and stayed in a horrible block of flats with those eyeglasses where old women look out, you know, they've got nothing to do all day, so they either look through the net curtains or the eyeglass.
Who and what were the Bromley contingent? I believe you said there was no such thing.
We didn't call ourselves the Bromley contingent. It was a title or a tag that was put on us by certain music people, press, journalists, that saw us and friends that we knew going to the early Pistol gigs and other events in London that didn't have a big audience. For some reason, they thought we all came from Bromley. It's just Steve that comes from Bromley. And we were called the Bromley contingent.
So no real significance behind that particular title?
No, not at all.
In September 76, you played on the bill of the 100 Club Punk Festival. The lineup of the band then was yourself, Steve, Sid Vicious and Marco Peroni, now of Adamant fame, of course, who apparently was the only one who had played in a band before. Can you tell me a bit about that gig?
The worst player at the gig was Marco because he had played before, so it didn't fit in with us that well. It was another adventure, and it was a very special event. And when you think that a lot of bands rehearse, invite record company people down to see them, they work really hard, and their first gig is usually like teething problems or something. We created a very strong impact from that one-off gig that was just thrown together literally. And we were infamous from that day onwards.
Didn't you and others have something to do with the opening of the punk movement's mecca, the Roxy Club?
Nothing to do with the opening of it, no. It was someone called Andy Tchaikovsky. Oh, we played there, and we played the last night of it, and probably one of the first nights. But we weren't involved in the business side of making it.
Right, despite becoming musically proficient and gaining public acceptance, because of your early image, people tended to mistrust you, and you had a lot of problems getting a record deal.
Correct. There was a lot to do with a lot of groups around that time were making music and looking like the very immediate short-term thing that the record companies wanted people to be. Like what's happening now, like you get record companies that will sell one band, they'll be like in the top 5 or 10 for 2 records, and then they'll disappear. That's exactly what the record industry wanted to do with what they called punk rock music. So you got loads of old sheep dressed up in lamb's clothing, looking like what they thought was punk, you know, just like a uniform, playing nothing with any depth or any lasting appeal. And that was fine for the record business because they didn't like what some bands were doing, especially what we were doing. I think they considered us threatening, the fact that we saw it as a long-term thing. And what we wanted from the record contract wasn't stupid. I mean, a lot of the people were very stupid when they signed up and didn't demand anything from the record company. So they were laughing. They got something for nothing. And the silly bands just took the bait and faded away.
In fact, another quote which I've got written down here: we'll do it on our own terms. We're not going to water down our music to make it acceptable to people who sit behind desks. Can you remember that?
Yeah, I don't know if I did or Steve said that. But it's an opinion that we all felt. It's the same as the question before. It's like if you want to tart it up and make it something to laugh at or something that's instantaneous, that won't last long, you can do it and like be a bit of a slag and do all the things that bands are supposed to do, be like very submissive and do what they want you to do, you know, ridiculous amounts of interviews, silly photo sessions to cater for the teeny bop magazines and all that kind of thing.
Your music was once described as, and I quote, boring sub-hippie drivel dressed in knickers for the sake of art.
Nick Lowe said that, who's pushing 40 now, I think.
Okay, how would you describe your music then?
Just dressed up in knickers.
What was the idea behind the Creatures project? Just yourself and Budgie using voice and drums?
It didn't happen as an idea, it just happened as an accident. And the first song that we did was But Not Them, during a rehearsal when two members of the band, the guitar people, happened to be having a tea break or something, and we were just knocking around in the rehearsal room and wrote But Not Them. Some lyrics that I had, and it's a drum pattern that Budgie had, and we just put them together. Something to do whilst they were drinking their tea. And then us and the rest of the band decided it didn't need anything else. It worked just as drums and voice. And then the idea was that we do a few songs and not include it on the Juju album and keep it separate.
In June of last year, you were told by a throat specialist to stop singing for 6 months and also to change your singing technique. How did you feel about that advice?
I resented it. And I mean, at first I was very worried because I did lose my voice and I was coughing up blood, and it felt very serious. It was very, I mean, it wasn't just a sore throat, it was like really painful. And we had to cancel a couple of Scandinavian dates, but with a few days rest, we did finish the tour. I got back, had a few days rest. We should have started recording immediately, but we'd already done some recording for the Dreamhouse album before we went away, so we were doing some mixing before doing recording, and then in the studio it's a lot easier to look after your voice because the situation's much more controllable. I mean, God, you know, in Scandinavia we were playing with such bad equipment some nights, and it was just a real battle just to be heard. And when you're fighting against sound problems, you tend to scream or shout and not really sing.
Do you still have problems with your voice now, or?
No, I mean, it's just, it happened because we've been working a hell of a lot. And it was just the strain of doing more work, but with bad equipment as well, and live. And like catching a cold and all that rubbish. And yeah, I'm fine. I mean, I think I'm singing better than I ever did.